Some of you may know this, but Johan and I are planning a trip in April to fly to Japan. So Johan, my husband, he was born in Japan, and it's been many, many years since he's been able to go back home. And so we've been anticipating this trip. We had one planned in 2020, and then, of course, COVID happened, so we weren't able to go. And now we've rescheduled it, and we're really looking forward to it. But let me tell you, I have realized, and maybe some of you can kind of be in the same boat with me here, there's a lot to worry about when you're planning an overseas trip. Like, I feel like the more I think about it, the more I realize how much I could be worried about. Anybody else? No, just me? Yeah? Okay, good. I see some hands. I feel so much better. Because I'm like, maybe I should just not think about it. No, you can't do that, right? Because you can't just bury your head in the sand. You have to plan and you have to prepare. But as you plan and prepare, you realize, oh, I didn't even think about that going wrong, or I didn't even realize, that could be an issue. I start to think, well, what if we sleep in and we just completely miss the flight? Like, okay, well, I guess I don't have to worry about any of the other things that would follow that. That's one way to deal with it. Or, we could get stopped at security. And, I like to think, that I can handle myself pretty well, but in those pressure situations, I fold like nobody's business, right? I'm like, it was me, whatever it is. Like, I'm sure it was me, I'm probably guilty, whatever it is. We could get questioned in that little tiny room that you see on border security. Like, oh no, with the tiny light bulb. You know what I'm talking about. Let me just say that's a terrible show to watch if you're about to travel, okay? So just don't watch it. There could be flight delays, there could be mechanical issues with the plane. We could have a very common April snowstorm, right? Mess up the flight plan. And then if we have delays, will we make our connecting flights? That's the next question, right? Just keep going down the list here. How about this? Who will I end up sitting by next to in the airplane? Uh-oh. And more importantly, will they want to talk to me? All the introverts in the room groan in unison, right? How many of us are talkers on the airplane? It's okay, we still love you. You can admit it. Are you a talker on the airplane? Yeah? How many of us are introverts on the airplane? I'm like, just don't talk to me. I've got my earphones in for a reason, right? It's okay, we can admit it. Maybe you're like me, and you want to look forward to these things. It's exciting, but you also find yourself kind of coming back to these patterns of anxious thoughts and fear about what the future might hold. That's really natural. This month, we are talking about this series of fear, and we recognize, it's a natural part of the human existence. It's just part of our experience here on earth. As I was studying for this talk, I came across a quote, and it's by Andy Stanley. And if you're in our small groups, you're probably familiar with him. He is an American author and pastor, and he says this about fear. He says, fear is the byproduct of our ability to collect knowledge and then project that knowledge into the future. Okay, so we collect knowledge based on our experience, and then we start to actually project that knowledge into what might happen in the future. This ability that we have to experience the world around us and then make informed predictions of what the future holds is part of what makes us human. It's built into our DNA. It's actually an ability that was given to us by God when He created us as human beings. And there are a lot of positives to this, okay? It's not all a bad thing. This is actually what keeps us safe, right? This can keep us from doing something dangerous. What would happen if I touched the stove while the burner is on? Well, I shouldn't do that because I know that others have done that in the past and they've gotten burned. So I'm not going to do that because it would be dangerous. This is also what allows human beings to make progress. So our imaginations, our ability to dream about what the future might hold instead of getting stuck in the here and now. Without this God-given ability to predict what the future might hold, we'll never be able to say, oh, I can't wait for that birthday party, or, oh, I really hope that, next week, on my vacation, it's going to be so fun, just can't wait for that. But the downside to this is that we can also start to wonder, what if? Maybe you're thinking that already. What if? We start to think about what might happen in the future based on what we know has happened in the past, right? For example, if I've experienced flight delays due to weather, I'm going to be watching that forecast to see what the weather's going to hold for the time that I'm going to be flying. Our predictions can cause us to worry because if what happened in the past happens in the future, then how will I handle that? How would I react? What would I do? What would I say? Would I be ready for it? Would I be prepared to handle that? And in more complex scenarios, we start to wonder how it's going to affect our families or our spouses or our friends. And these questions kind of just go on. And maybe you're familiar with this feeling. I know I certainly am. And so we find ourselves in this tension with this innate reality, this ability within us. It's part of what makes us human, realizing that this very thing that causes us to hope and to dream and to look into the future with excitement can also cause us a sense of fear and anxiety. So today we're going to talk about symptoms of fear. In other words, what can we identify as warning signs of fear? What's going on under the surface when our fears or anxieties are triggered, and how does that affect how we think and how we act? Studies have shown that one of the most common symptoms of fear is actually anger. And anger is often triggered by a sense of losing control. Losing control. And so today we're going to zero in on that relationship between anger and fear and how we can learn to live in a healthier way, in a way that doesn't allow fear and the anger that flows out of it to dictate our behavior or how we start to live our lives. And listen, I hate to break it to you this morning, but I don't have 5 easy steps to never be afraid again, okay? I'm so sorry. They didn't teach me that in Bible college, so I don't have any answers for you there. It's a much more complex issue than that, right? We understand that. But it's worth talking about, because most of us encounter these emotions on a daily basis. And as a church, we want to talk about things where the rubber meets the road. And ultimately, we as a church don't want to let these emotions master us, right? We don't want to let them put us off balance or gain control over the way that we live. We know that there must be a better way, right? So we're going to look to the Bible today. And if you don't have a physical Bible with you today, a book in book form, if you prefer, you can use your device and you can download the Bible app and read it from there. Now, the beautiful thing about the Bible is that it has answers to our questions about day-to-day life. And the Bible extensively covers this topic of fear. The phrase, "don't be afraid," is mentioned hundreds of times. And so it's not surprising that Jesus himself had a lot to say about fear. And he was very concerned about teaching his disciples to live in such a way that ensured that fear was not going to control their life. But Jesus didn't just tell his disciples not to be afraid and kind of just leave it at that. Okay, I've given you all you need to know, just don't be afraid. Have at her. He actually showed them that the love and the peace that he had to offer them was better than any learned behavior that they had kind of picked up along the way and any coping mechanism that they could use. So we're going to look at one instance today where Jesus modeled this for his disciples. And if you're a follower of Jesus today, maybe this story is familiar to you. And actually, I don't want to ruin the surprise, but Pastor Dallas mentioned it when he was talking about his child dedication. We're going to look at this story with a slightly different lens today. So I want you to kind of put your curiosity hat on, okay? I teach Sunday school, so let's put our curiosity hats on, everybody. I should have brought my candy bin. I don't know what I was thinking. But let's read this today. We're looking at Luke chapter 18, starting in verse 15. Let's read it. So one day, some parents brought their little children to Jesus so he could touch and bless them. But when the disciples saw this, they scolded the parents for bothering him. Then Jesus called for the children and said to the disciples, "Let the children come to me. Don't stop them, For the kingdom of God belongs to those who are like these children. Again, some of us have read this before, and even if you haven't, at first glance, there doesn't seem to be too much going on here in this encounter. Parents want to bring their children to Jesus, the disciples stop them, and Jesus ultimately lets them come close because he wants to bless them. But when we read the Bible, we need to remember that context is everything. So let's just take a closer look at what's going on here. You need to know that at this point in Jesus' ministry, he's starting to gain a lot of attention from people because he's been teaching, but he's also been performing miracles and healings. So physical healings. People are coming with broken arms and they're getting fixed, and they can't see and then they can see. And there's these unexplainable miracles that are happening. He's blowing people's mind. Word is spreading fast about what he's done and said, and he's becoming a very popular person. So as you can imagine, everywhere that he goes, the crowd follows him. He's not getting a lot of alone time at this point. But within the crowd are 12 men, and they are called his disciples. They were like Jesus' closest friends. They went everywhere with him, and they were actually committed to learning from him, and he was intentional about teaching them and modeling for them how he wanted them to live. It was very common at the time for religious teachers to have these disciples, these men who would devote their time and energy to following in the teacher's footsteps. Literally, they would follow them wherever they went, and they would learn from them. And the more the popular the teacher became, can you guess, the more popular the students were as well, right? So you can imagine that as Jesus is gaining this popularity, his disciples do too. And it's safe to say that his disciples were probably feeling pretty excited about Jesus' fame. They're like, yeah, we're on the inside. Something cool is about to happen. At this point, I think they were pretty convinced that Jesus actually was who he said he was, God himself in human form, walking on the earth. And they were excited about how he was going to change the world as they knew it. So word is spreading, the crowds are gathering, and people don't just want to hear Jesus speak, but they actually want to see him perform miracles. They're like, well, I heard about that guy who was blind, and here's a guy who's blind. What are you going to do, Jesus? I'd like to see that for myself. And so people would bring friends or family members with sickness or disabilities to Jesus, and they would ask him to heal them. Here they are, Jesus. What are you going to do? And what would have been very culturally appropriate at the time would be for the disciples of the religious teacher to kind of act like a bouncer or filter those who were allowed to get close to the teacher, who got his attention. This would have been a way for the disciples to show honor and respect to their teacher. So this is kind of the cultural lens that the disciples are seeing these families through, these families that are coming towards Jesus. And as these parents and their children are getting closer and closer to Jesus, the disciples would have been feeling this rising social pressure to kind of filter out who was allowed to come to Jesus as a way to honor and respect him. And so right away, their guard is up. And right away, we read that they scold the parents. So you can imagine whatever they said, get away, that's not right now. Just shoo, right? Whatever it is. And so right away, it's important here. We remember the hierarchy of society at the time. In that day and age, women and children were highly undervalued, and they were looked down upon. And here we read in what we just read, that these people, mothers and fathers, they were bringing their children, in some translations it says little children, to Jesus. So it's reasonable for us to assume that these could have been toddlers or even infants that they were bringing to Jesus. So it says the disciples scolded the parents and they were angry with them. And I think it's important for us to ask the question, why were they angry? Why did they have that kind of immediate reaction to them? Was it because they skipped lunch that day? I can get kind of hangry if I haven't eaten, right? I think it's because this situation was triggering their social anxiety. I think a lot of us have been in those kind of scenarios where we're forced to make those quick, last-minute decisions, and I've been there. I haven't always made the right ones. Think about it. These children, well, I know as a children's pastor, they can kind of be a little bit loud sometimes, right? It's okay to admit it. Maybe some of them were crying as they were being brought to Jesus. Maybe it was super loud. Kids are usually a little messy. And worst of all, kids are very unpredictable. I've definitely learned that. I'm like, where did that come from? Whoa. Let's put ourselves in the disciples' shoes again just for a second here. I think there's a few things that they might have been thinking at this point as they're watching the parents and their kids come towards Jesus. Maybe they were thinking, don't these people see how busy Jesus is? Don't they see this crowd? Do they really think he has time to just hang out with these kids when they don't even need healing? In other words, maybe they were afraid of doing something that was considered socially unacceptable, and maybe they thought the crowd would judge them if they brought the kids and the parents towards Jesus. Or considering the fact that they would have known that they kind of needed to show honor and respect to Jesus by who was allowed to come towards him, maybe they were thinking, well, what is Jesus going to think of us if we screw this up and we let the kids and the parents come right close to them? In other words, maybe they were scared of dishonoring Jesus, their teacher, who was gaining all this popularity and who had taken them under his wing. Remember, anger is often a symptom of an underlying fear. And I think it's safe to say that the disciples' social anxiety about this situation, about what Jesus or others in the crowd might think of them, was causing them to push these families away. Their fear was making the decision for them. And don't we do this today? We're so aware of what isn't socially acceptable, and we will do almost anything when we feel triggered because we're like, I don't quite fit the mold here. So sometimes maybe we buy the right toys because we're afraid that if we don't, we maybe won't fit in. Or maybe we sometimes post on social media so we can maintain an acceptable image of who we are, what we do. Maybe if you're married, what kind of spouse you are. Or maybe if you have kids, maybe what kind of parent you are. And sometimes our actions can actually be driven by that sense of social pressure or anxiety about what people might think of us. It's a good idea to just pause and ask ourselves, why do I feel the need to buy this? Or why do I feel the need to post this? Or really insert anything into that, whatever you're experiencing. What's going on the inside that I feel driven to do this? Because here the disciples are feeling so triggered by this awkward social situation that they scold these families and try to turn them away rather than risk making a fool of themselves, or even worse, making a fool of Jesus. But here's what I love about this story, and it's what Jesus does in response. He says, no, let the little children come to me. I want to be close to them. I want to bless them. That's what I'm here for. And this is such a powerful response, first because it shows Jesus' love for those who were seen as less than, like women and children. And I want to encourage you today, if you've come in here or if you're watching online and you are feeling like you're less than, like you don't measure up, and whatever has happened has made you feel like you're just unworthy today, you're feeling like maybe you don't fit that mold, whatever it is, you need to know that this is Jesus' response to you today as well. He today is wanting to pull you close to him, not push you away from him. He wants to be close to you, and he wants you to experience his love in greater and greater ways. What Jesus is doing also here in this story is he's modeling for his disciples, because remember, they're watching everything he's doing and they're listening to everything he's saying. So he's modeling to them a better way to live. He was well aware of the social anxiety, maybe the triggers that his friends were facing in that moment, and he was releasing them of that need to follow the unwritten rules. He was showing them that they didn't need to allow that kind of inner caution light, that inner anxiety to dictate how they treated other people. The love and the peace that Jesus had to offer them was better than the temporary sense of control that they could gain by pushing these families away. You know, when I was a kid, we had a family friend who was more like an uncle to me. And maybe you have people in your life as you've grown up that have been friends, but they're more like family. He was an incredible person, and he shared Jesus' love with everyone that he met. And I remember when he used to come over to our house, I was so excited because he would always give me this biggest bear hug. When I heard him come through the door, I would actually back up down our hallway, and then I would take a running leap towards him, and I would just launch myself into his arms. And as I got a little bit older, he had to say, "Okay, Emma, I think that's enough. Like, you're too tall to do this," right? I'm like, "Oh, really?" And he would always catch me. There was never one time when he couldn't catch me. I like to imagine how Jesus would have embraced these children. I like to think of him holding out his arms and letting a toddler run into them, get a big bear hug, or he'd gently take a baby from their mother's arms and say a blessing over them, because that's what he was there for. And I'm sure as the disciples watched Jesus embrace these kids, their minds were racing a mile a minute. He's just blown their minds, because he wasn't operating with the same cultural expectations that they were used to. He was way more interested in what was going on in their hearts in that moment than whether they were behaving in the right or the wrong way. And I don't know about you, but I don't blame the disciples for reacting to the families the way that they did. And that's because I think I could have easily reacted the same way. And the reason why I say that is because I know I felt all of the underlying emotions that I imagine the disciples were feeling in that moment. Worry about what other people will think of me, and anxiety about an unpredictable social situation, right? Or the fear of rejection. I've been in situations before when I'm just trying to be a good host, and I'm just trying to be a good friend, and I'm just trying to be a good daughter, or whatever it is. And I'm like, am I just going to offend everyone in this room? Like, how am I supposed to navigate all of this? And I get stuck in those anxious thought patterns. But what I've noticed about those times when I feel that triggered anxiety is that I feel angry about it. And my anger kind of boils under the surface. And I struggle to regain a sense of control over my emotions and over the circumstance that I'm facing. And I'm thinking that maybe some of us can relate today. But Jesus changed everything for the disciples. And you know what? Today, he can change everything for us as well. And if you have a relationship with Jesus today, you know that it's only his love that can transform the way that we think and act. I've heard it said before that there's a reason why God is love. There's a reason why God is love. And it's because love is what we need the most. Just like his disciples, Jesus doesn't just tell us not to fear and then leave us to figure out life on our own. He actually wants to have a relationship with us so that his loving presence in our lives can be a source of peace, no matter what circumstances we find ourselves in, and no matter what triggers our inner fear and anxiety. His love embraces our fearful hearts and helps us to learn a better way. I came across this blog post from one of my favorite authors, and maybe you're familiar with her, but her name is Anne Voskamp. And Anne writes about her experience recovering from agoraphobia, which, if you're familiar with it, it's the fear of places or situations that you can't escape from. And there's a little bit more to it than that, but that's kind of a basic definition. I wanted to read this excerpt, it's very short, from her blog post about how her relationship with Jesus has actually helped her to find healing and freedom as she's recovered from this. So I want to read it for you. She says, "There's a part of me that's still that 5-year-old girl who walked into her first day of school carrying a Nielsen's milk bag for her book bag and didn't know what to do when she walked into the wrong classroom of grade 2s and her face flushed fiery red and she just wanted the floor to open up. And this farm girl who went to college in the big city and was diagnosed with agoraphobia. The fear of avoiding places that might cause panic and feelings of being trapped, helpless, or embarrassed, well, yeah, she's still in here. And you can catch a glimpse of her every now and again. There were several months back when I was 20 that part of me needed some wise and good medication to regulate, and then therapy and a toolbox of helpful, responsive tools. But I can still low-key panic in a room full of minglers and dazzling extroverts and feel the heat of nerve blotches breaking up all up my neck. And yet, what I keep discovering is shaming those anxious and fearful parts of your soul fails to actually calm those parts down. And what actually helps is this. Instead of trying to beat parts of you into being braver or calmer or better, give those parts of you the beat of a greater love song to dance to. Because this is one of the very deepest truths in the whole universe. When love sits down with fear, so many things calm down. When love puts its arm around fear, so many fears just melt. And frankly, fear is one brute of a conniving monster, and fear tends to defend itself with the roaring mask of anger, or fear disguises itself with a bloated pride, or fear goes around relentlessly shaming, thinking it can pile on enough shame, and then it can flatten you till it reshapes you into someone better. But for all its ferocious huffing and blustering and shaming, fear is still small and finite, and it's love alone that is infinite. Honestly, it was just this past summer when I spent a few days with a group of friends, and this inferior fear part of me went wild, grabbing hold of this narrative and ranting loud down the hallways in my head, banging around in the chambers of my heart. I didn't belong. I wasn't enough. I was failing. As if fear wildly setting off these internal alarms could somehow rally a rescue from somewhere else. But it turns out that you can be shamed and labeled and ghosted and mocked and abandoned, cut off, humiliated, devastated in a million different ways, and this truth will still remain. When you are fully known by God and still fully loved by God, nothing can truly scare you in all the world. The worst case scenario is that all the very worst things happen and you are still loved. So there really is no worst case scenario. I love those words from Anne because they reflect not just her struggle with fear and insecurity, but also the presence of God in her life that has held her steady as she's learned and grown through the years. And so as we close today, I just want to ask the question, where do we go from here? I think we've all kind of experienced fear in different aspects of our life, but where do we go? And I think there's a few ways that we can intentionally begin to identify what's going on under the surface when we experience different fear triggers and anger as a result. And really all it boils down to is acknowledging how we feel and then being real about what we might struggle with. The next step starts with being real for all of us. And so first, we need to be curious about our own anger. So I'm angry. Maybe I've snapped at my spouse, or I've lost my cool with, if you have kids, one of your kids, or, I'm frustrated with my coworker and I'm angry. And for some of us today, even just admitting that you're angry is a big step for you. And I might be in that boat as well. And so allowing yourself to take a step back and admit when you're feeling angry is a big thing. So we need to do that. But then we need to be curious and ask, why am I angry? And if there might be an underlying fear under that anger, then the next step is to ask, what am I trying to control here? One of the triggers of fear, remember, can be that sense of a loss of control. And so for some of us, admitting that we are afraid can be really difficult as well. Anger, let's just be honest, anger is often more socially acceptable than fear, especially for the men in the room. And so acknowledging and putting words to how we are feeling is an important first step. But we can't stop there, friends. We need to invite Jesus into that conversation with us. There's a reason why Jesus had so much to say about fear and why he was so intentional to make sure that he modeled a better way for his disciples to live. And why does he want you and I to learn this better way? It's because he cares for us. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 29, he says that he knows even when a sparrow falls to the ground. In other words, he sees everything. And how much more is he aware of, and how much more does he understand the hard things that we go through? So friends, you are so valuable to him. He cares about you and he sees you. And it's his desire that we would continually grow in that security of his love so that the next time we do feel afraid, because it's coming, his love would soften our hearts so that we can release that need to control and receive his peace into our lives instead. There's a security that we can find in God's love that is unlike anything else. We can wake up every day ready to face the unknown of what the day will bring because none of us know what's coming. How people will treat us, what will happen, what the circumstances will be like. We can place all of that unknown into the hands of God because the reality is we can't control it anyways. And fear is a familiar part of our human experience this side of eternity, but it doesn't have to control us. In fact, it's releasing control where we find peace. We don't know what the future holds, but we know that God's love is the same no matter what, and that makes all the difference for us today. And so as we close today, I just want to pray. I know that the wheels may be turning. I know that we've talked about a few different things today, that wherever we're at and wherever we've kind of come in from today, I want to pray that we would have a sense of Jesus meeting us there, wherever it is. And if this is your first time hearing about Jesus, I just want you to know that he loves you and that he's glad that you're here. And for you today, it may just be saying hi, a simple hello, and that's wonderful. So let's pray as we do that. And you can come, Daryl. Jesus, we're just so grateful for your love, for the security that we find in your presence in our lives. And today, God, we know that there are many different things that can trigger our fears and our anxieties. And so we want to place those things into your hands this morning. And God, as we just seek to trust you more and more, God, would you continue to show us the practical ways that you are meeting us in our day-to-day lives, the way that you are coming alongside us and giving us what we need in each interaction and in each experience that we go through. We're so grateful for your presence in our lives. And if you here today have not accepted Jesus, received his love for the first time, would you just pray these words with me? Jesus, I accept your love into my life today. Would you change me from the inside out? I want to live for you the rest of my days. Amen.